Clara Holloway's hands were a map of her struggle. The skin was split at the knuckles from the cold, and the lines in her palms were permanently stained with the alkali dust of the high Wyoming prairie. It was October, and the wind already carried the promise of a brutal winter. It howled down from the bighorns, a hollow sound that made the ranch house feel smaller, more fragile. She was alone. It had been nearly 2 years since her husband, Tom, had been taken by the fever, his lungs filling with a fluid the doc called consumption. Then, just last winter, her father, a man who seemed as tough and enduring as the mountains themselves, had been thrown from a roan he was breaking. He'd lasted 3 days, his back broken, and died in the bed Tom had died in. The ranch, Holloway's End, was hers now, or hers to lose. She worked from the black hour before dawn until she was too tired to see. She mended fences that the wind or the weight of drifting snow knocked down. She doctored her small herd of cattle, her herd shrinking as she sold off stock to pay for feed. She rode the line, her father's old Winchester rifle heavy across her lap, watching for the rustlers who thought a lone woman was an easy mark. They had tried. Twice. The first time, she'd fired 2 shots over their heads, and they'd scattered. The second time, a month ago, she'd been less generous. She had grazed one of their horses, and they hadn't come back. But the rustlers were a visible threat. The real danger was quieter. A column of numbers in a leather-bound ledger she kept on her father's desk. The ledger told a story of drought, disease, and debt. The last page was a testament to the First National Bank of Wyndham and its president, Silas Meeker. She was dipping into her last bag of flour when she saw the buggy. It was a fine, black spider of a thing, pulled by a matched set of black geldings, stark against the endless pale grass. Only one man in the territory drove a rig like that. Clara wiped her hands on her apron, a useless gesture, and stepped onto the porch. She didn't bother to smooth her hair, which was pulled back in a tight, functional bun. She watched him approach, her face set. Silas Meeker was a man built of soft edges and hard intentions. He was thick in the middle, his suit coat perfectly tailored to disguise it. He wore a black bowler hat and a waistcoat with a gold watch chain draped across his stomach. He was the bank. He was the town. He was the spider. He reined in his horses and stepped down, dusting his coat, though there was no dust. He looked at her ranch house, his eyes lingering on the peeling paint and the patch of shingles she'd nailed down herself after the last windstorm. His gaze was an assessment, an appraisal. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, removing his hat. His hair was slick and dark, thinning at the crown. "A cold day to be visiting, I know. May I come in?" Clara held the door open but did not step back. "Mr. Meeker." He stepped inside, bringing the scent of bay rum and money into her home. He looked around the main room, which served as her kitchen, parlor, and office. His eyes noted the clean but threadbare rug, the empty space on the wall where her father's prize rifle had hung before she'd had to sell it, and the small stack of ledgers on the desk. "You keep a tidy home. Clara, may I call you Clara?" "You may state your business, Mr. Meeker." He gave a small, indulgent chuckle, as if at a child's impertinence. "Always to the point, just like your father. Samuel was a good man, a fine rancher, but not," he paused, "a businessman. He left you in a difficult position." "My father left me this ranch. I am managing." "Are you?" Meeker walked to the window and looked out toward the corrals. "I see a fence down by the creek. I see your herd is thin. I hear in town that you've been turned away for credit at the feed store. These are not the signs of managing, my dear. These are the signs of drowning." Clara's spine went rigid. "The feed store deals with your bank. I imagine you know exactly why my credit is no good." He turned, his face a mask of polite concern. "Which brings me to my visit. I am here as a friend, as your father's friend. You were my father's banker. There's a difference. A banker can be a friend. He is in a unique position to help. Meeker sat down at her table, though he had not been invited, and placed his hat on the wood. He folded his soft hands. You are in debt, Clara, deeply. The note your father signed, the one I now hold, is due in full in 60 days. The drought last year, the hard winter. You have no collateral left. You cannot possibly pay it. Clara stood across from him, her hands clenched at her sides. She had known this. She had seen it coming in the ledger, but hearing it spoken in his smooth, oiled voice made it feel like a coffin lid closing. What do you want, Silas? His eyes brightened. He had been waiting for that. I want to help you. I want to save this ranch. More importantly, I want to save you. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a confidential, almost intimate tone. This is no life for a woman. This hardship, this filth. He gestured at her worn canvas trousers. You are a respectable widow. You should be in town, in a fine home. You should have protection, ease. I am not looking for ease. Mr. Meeker, I am looking for an extension on my loan. An extension will only delay the inevitable. You will be in this same position in 6 months, only poorer. No, he said, shaking his head gently. I have a different solution, a permanent one. He let the silence stretch, his gaze fixed on her. Marry me, Clara. The words dropped into the quiet room and lay there, obscene. Clara stared at him, sure she had misheard. His face was perfectly earnest. Marry you? It is the perfect solution. As my wife, your debt becomes my concern. This ranch. He waved a dismissive hand. We can manage it, or sell it. The railroad is coming through. You know, they will pay a handsome price for this land, for the water rights. We would be very comfortable. You would be safe, protected. Clara felt a cold sickness rise in her throat. He wasn't talking about marriage. He was talking about an acquisition. He wanted her land for the railroad, and she was just a legal obstacle to be absorbed. He found her disgusting, her work filthy. He wanted to package her up, just like the land. You are talking about my father's legacy, she said, her voice dangerously quiet. My home. Your father is gone. Clara, this is about your future, a future of comfort. I am a wealthy man. You would want for nothing. You are still a handsome woman. You just need softening, polishing. He smiled, a tight pinch at the corners of his mouth. I would find great pleasure in that. The possessiveness in his voice, the way his eyes roamed over her, made her skin crawl. He wasn't just threatening her ranch. He was threatening her. She walked to the door and pulled it open. The cold wind rushed in, rattling the papers on her desk. No, she said. Meeker's smile faltered. No. That is not a proposal. Mr. Meeker, it is a threat. You find my life filthy, but I find your offer disgusting. I would rather burn this ranch to the ground and walk away with nothing than be polished by you. Now, get out of my house. Silas Meeker stood slowly. The mask of concern was gone. His face was pale, his eyes like 2 chips of ice. He picked up his hat and settled it on his head, his movements precise. You are proud, Mrs. Halloway, he said, his voice a smooth, oiled stone. It is a terrible flaw in a woman. You will not find it so easy to dismiss me when you are standing in the snow. He walked past her and out onto the porch. He climbed into his buggy, his movements unhurried. He did not look back as he drove away, disappearing back toward the town he owned. Clara shut the door and leaned against it, her body trembling with a mixture of rage and fear. She had won the battle, but she knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she had just given him the excuse to start the war. His revenge was not fast. It was quiet, like frost. The first blow came a week later. She rode into Wyndham for supplies, her wagon rattling. She went to the feed store first. Mr. Henderson, a man who had known her father for 20 years, was behind the counter. "Morning, Mr. Henderson," she said, handing him her list. Just 10 bags of feed and 2 of salt. He wouldn't meet her eye. He wiped his hands on his apron and cleared his throat. Clara, I can't. Can't what? Can't extend you any more credit. My books, I just can't. I've been good for it, haven't I? I always pay. It's not that, he said, his voice low, miserable. It's the bank, Mr. Meeker called in my own note. He's reviewing all my accounts. He said I'm overextended, especially to you. I'm sorry, Clara. Cash only. Clara stared at him. She had $17 in her pocket. Not enough. I see. She left the list on the counter and walked out. The same story was repeated at the hardware store. Mr. Gable, who had bounced her on his knee as a child, suddenly needed cash for every nail, every coil of wire. She felt the town turning cold, the walls closing in. She saw Meeker's hand in every turned back, every averted gaze. She rode home with an empty wagon and a stomach tight with dread. The second blow came 2 weeks later, delivered by a boy on a tired-looking mule. It was an official letter from the courthouse. It was written in dense, legal language, but the meaning was clear. The First National Bank of Wyndham was calling in her full note, effective immediately. The 60 days Meeker had mentioned were gone. She rode to town in a fury, the letter clutched in her hand. She stormed into the bank, but Meeker was in a meeting. She went to the courthouse to see Judge Harrelson. The clerk told her the judge was unavailable. She waited on the wooden bench outside his office for 3 hours. When he finally emerged, he looked startled to see her. Mrs. Halloway, what a surprise. Harrelson was a small, nervous man who always looked like he was apologizing. Judge, you have to stop this. Meeker is using a clause my father didn't understand. This is theft. The judge adjusted his spectacles. Clara, my dear, the law is the law. The bank has presented documents, signatures, your father's signature. The lien is valid. The note is in default. My hands are tied. He's doing this because I refused him, she said, her voice dropping. Refused him what? He asked me to marry him. He wants the land for the railroad. Judge Harrelson's face went pale. Mrs. Halloway, I cannot listen to such accusations. You are distraught. Silas Meeker is a pillar of this community. You are accusing him of coercion. That is a serious and, frankly, unbelievable claim. The foreclosure is legal. The order is signed. She looked at the small, weak man, and she saw the truth. He was Meeker's man, just like the feed store, just like the hardware store. They were all his. When? She whispered. The sheriff will serve the papers tomorrow. You have 24 hours to vacate the premises. The final blow came with the snow. It started in the night, a few lazy flakes that quickly turned into a thick, swirling curtain of white. By dawn, the ground was covered, and the wind was a high-pitched scream. Clara hadn't slept. She had sat at her father's desk, the ledger open, her rifle loaded beside it. She had no plan. There was nowhere to go. She heard the horses just after 9 o'clock. The sound was muffled by the storm. She went to the door and saw them. Sheriff Brody, a man she respected, and 2 deputies she didn't recognize. They were hard-looking men, their faces wrapped in scarves, their hats pulled low. Meeker's men. Clara, Sheriff Brody said, swinging down from his horse. He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the porch floor. This is a bitter day. It is. Sheriff, are you here to do his dirty work? I'm here to do my job, he said, his voice heavy. I have an order. You have to leave. This is my home. It's the bank's property now. Clara, please, don't make this harder. She looked past him at the 2 deputies. They were already dismounting, moving toward the house. No, she said, stepping back and raising the rifle. You are not coming in. The sheriff put his hand on his pistol. Clara, put it down. You can't win this. Those two men work for Meeker, not the county. They will not be gentle. Put it down, and I'll see you get to town safe." She looked at his tired, ashamed face. She looked at the two men advancing, their hands on their own guns. She thought of firing. She thought of dying on her own porch. But she saw the cold, impatient look in the deputy's eyes. They wanted this. Slowly, her shoulders slumped. She lowered the rifle. "That's right," Brody said, his voice full of relief. "Give it to me." One of the deputies was faster. He lunged forward, grabbed the rifle from her hands, and threw it into a snowdrift. "No need for that, ma'am," he sneered. "Get her things," the other one said. They were not gentle. They went inside, their boots tracking snow and mud onto her clean floor. She heard them opening chests, drawers. They were efficient. They carried out her mother's cedar chest, her father's saddle, a box of her kitchen things, and her trunk of clothes. They tossed them onto the wagon road, into the swirling snow. One of the men dropped the kitchen box and her mother's china plates, the only fine things she owned, shattered. The man laughed. Clara stood on the porch, frozen, watching them dismantle her life. She was numb. The humiliation was so deep, so total, it was beyond tears. In 10 minutes, it was done. "Ma'am," Sheriff Brody said, holding her horse, which she'd saddled hours before. "Let me take you to the boarding house in town. Mrs. Gable will see to you." Clara looked at him. She saw the town. She saw the pitying looks of the women, their whispers behind their hands. She saw the men, their judgment, their relief that it was her and not them. She saw Silas Meeker, sitting in his warm office, smoking a cigar, victorious. "No," she whispered, "I will not go to town. Clara, you can't. A storm like this, you'll die out here." "Then I'll die," she said. She pulled her hat down low and walked past him. She went to her horse, her movements stiff. She piled her few remaining belongings, a small bag of clothes and her mother's jewelry box, into the saddlebags. She had one blanket, which she tied behind the cantle. The deputies were bolting the door to her home. She heard the heavy, final sound of the latch falling. She put her foot in the stirrup and pulled herself up. She didn't look back at the men. She didn't look back at the house, her father's house. She turned her horse's head west, away from town, and kicked it into a walk. She rode into the teeth of the storm. The world was white. There was no sky, no land, just the blinding, endless swirl of snow and the scream of the wind. She rode for hours, her body moving with the horse, her mind a cold, empty void. The numbness that had protected her on the porch was fading, replaced by a cold that was physical, biting. It seeped through her canvas coat, through her gloves, into her bones. She didn't know where she was going. She was just going away. Away from the shame, away from the pity, away from the man who had taken everything. By late afternoon, the light began to fail. The sky turned a bruised, sickening purple, and the snow grew deeper. Her horse, a sturdy mare named Bess, was flagging. Every step was a struggle, its head low. Clara knew she had to stop. To keep going was suicide. She saw a dark line of cottonwoods ahead, signaling a riverbed. Shelter. Maybe. She dismounted, her legs so stiff they nearly buckled. She led the horse down a shallow embankment, the wind lessening slightly among the bare, rattling branches. She would camp here, make a fire, survive the night. She was fumbling with the saddlebags, her fingers too numb to work the buckles. When she took a step back, her foot, which she could no longer feel, landed on a loose stone hidden by the snow. It rolled. She felt the snap in her ankle before the pain hit. It was a sharp, sickening sound. She cried out, a sound that was stolen instantly by the wind, and fell. The pain was white-hot, immediate. It shot up her leg, clearing her mind. She tried to push herself up, but the moment she put weight on her left foot, she collapsed again, a wave of nausea washing over her. Bess, spooked by her cry and the fall, shied away. The horse pulled its reins free from her numb hand and, with a frightened snort, bolted, disappearing into the white darkness in seconds. "No," Clara whimpered. "No, Bess, come back!" But she was gone. The horse, her last link to survival, was gone. Clara Holloway was alone, her ranch lost, her ankle broken, and the storm rising. She tried to crawl, to drag herself deeper into the trees, but the pain was too much. The cold, which had been a creeping enemy, now rushed in to claim her. Her body was shaking violently. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. A strange, warm peace settled over her. She was so tired. She lay her head down on the snow. It was soft, like a pillow. She could just rest for a minute, just a minute. She closed her eyes, and the world faded to black. He found her just before the freeze would have claimed her. Elias Crow was not a man who enjoyed the world. He lived alone, high in a mountain cabin, far from the town of Wyndham, far from the railroad, far from people. He had come back from the war 10 years earlier with a scarred body and a hollowed-out soul. He hunted, he trapped, he trained the occasional horse for a neighbor he trusted, and he kept to himself. He had been tracking a mountain lion for 2 days, and the storm had made him angry. He was leading his horse through the riverbed, the most sheltered path back to his cabin, when he saw the dark shape half buried in a snowdrift. He thought it was a calf, strayed from a herd. He drew his knife, thinking he might as well put it out of its misery. He stopped, his hand on the hilt. It wasn't a calf, it was a person. He moved with a quiet, efficient grace. He knelt, brushed the snow from her face. A woman. Her skin was a waxy, pale blue. He put his bare fingers to her neck. He had seen a lot of death. She was not dead. Not yet. A faint, thready pulse fluttered against his skin. He looked around. No horse, no camp, just the woman, alone, in the heart of a blizzard. A flicker of irritation passed over him. He lived alone precisely to avoid this. This was trouble. This was the world intruding. He could leave her. The wolves would find her by morning. It would be a kindness, perhaps. But he had been a soldier. He had carried men on his back. He had seen enough people die who didn't have to. With a low sigh that was lost in the wind, he stood. He was a tall man, built of sinew and quiet anger. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She was a bundle of wet, frozen rags. As he lifted her, her left leg dangled at an unnatural angle, broken. He settled her in front of him on his horse, a big buckskin that didn't flinch. He wrapped her in his own worn, wool-lined slicker, pulling her back against his chest to share his own meager warmth. He turned the horse's head toward the mountain, toward the cabin. He did not know her name. He did not care. He just knew that he had brought the storm into his home, and he was not happy about it. But he had done it. He rode into the white, the unconscious woman a cold, dead weight in his arms, and did not look back. He tended to her ankle by the light of his fire, his movements practical and rough. He cut her boot away, his face grim as he saw the swelling. He splinted it with 2 pieces of kindling and strips of a clean feed sack. He forced a little warm broth, thin and salty, between her blue lips. And she coughed, but she swallowed. He laid her on his own cot, covered her with every blanket he owned, and then sat in his one chair, staring into the fire, cleaning his rifle, and waiting for the storm, and the woman, to pass. Clara woke to 2 sensations, one sharp, one dull. The sharp was the fire, a throbbing, white-hot complaint from her left ankle. The dull was confusion. She was not in the snow, she was warm. She was lying on a narrow cot, covered by 3 thick wool blankets that smelled of wood smoke, cedar, and horse. The room was small, a single square built of rough-hewn logs, chinked with mud and straw. A fire crackled in a large stone hearth. casting a dancing, unsteady light. On the other side of the fire, a man sat in a chair, his back to her. He was cleaning a rifle, his movements economical and precise. Her breath caught. This was the man who had found her. She remembered, in flashes, being lifted, the warmth of his body against hers, the steady movement of his horse. The cabin was rough, but it was clean. A set of shelves held tins and jars, neatly arranged. A heavy coat hung from a peg by the door. A saddle, dark with use, was perched on a simple wooden stand. There was no clutter, no softness. It was the home of a man who owned little and wanted less. She tried to sit up, and the movement sent a jolt of pure agony up her leg. A low gasp escaped her lips. The man stopped his work. He didn't turn. "Your ankle's broke," he said. His voice was a low rumble, like stones moving in a deep creek bed. "I splinted it. You move, you'll undo the work." Clara's mind, cleared by the pain, snapped into focus. The humiliation, the cold, the ranch. Silas Meeker. She was in a stranger's cabin, a cripple, indebted. Her pride, the only thing Meeker hadn't been able to take, rose up like a cornered animal. "Where am I?" she demanded. Her voice was a dry croak. "My cabin, Bighorn Foothills." He set the rifle down and stood, turning to face her. He was tall, broader than she had realized. He wore simple canvas trousers and a flannel shirt. The sleeves rolled up his forearms. His face was angular, all planes and shadows, covered in a dark, untrimmed beard. A long, white scar cut down from his left temple, narrowly missing his eye and disappearing into his beard. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale, clear, and cold. He looked like a man who had been carved from the same hard rock as the mountains. He picked up a tin cup from the hearth and a ladle from a pot hanging over the fire. He filled the cup and walked toward her. "Broth. Drink it." "I don't need your charity," she said, pushing herself up on her elbows. The room spun. He stopped, his eyes unblinking. "It's not charity, it's broth. You are half froze. You drink it or you don't. Makes no mind to me. But you're in my house, and the storm's still blowing. You can't walk." He held out the cup. It was an offering, blunt and unadorned. She stared at him, her jaw set, her pride warring with the gnawing hunger and the shaking in her limbs. He just waited, patient as a mountain. Finally, her shame at her own weakness overwhelming her, she snatched the cup from his hand. The hot tin burned her fingers, but she didn't flinch. She drank. The broth was thin, just water and salt and the faint taste of rabbit, but it was the hottest, most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. It spread warmth through her chest, a temporary truce with the cold that had settled in her bones. He watched her drain the cup, then took it from her hand. "Rest. The storm's not done." "How long have I been here?" "A day. You slept through—" He turned and went back to his fire. Clara lay back, her head spinning. She was trapped by the storm, trapped by her own broken body, and trapped by the silent, scarred man who had saved her. The next 2 days were a battle. The storm howled outside, a constant shrieking reminder of her helplessness. The cabin was a small, warm prison. Elias Crow, as she learned was his name, was a difficult jailer. He was not unkind, but he was silent. He seemed to fill the small space with his solitude, and her presence was a clear intrusion. They clashed at first, 2 stubborn wills in a 10-by-10 room. Her pride chafed at her dependency. "I need to use the privy," she said on the second morning, her face hot with humiliation. He nodded, blunt. "There's a bucket behind the screen. I'll empty it." "I will not be treated like an invalid." "You are an invalid," he replied, not looking up from the piece of tack he was mending. "You got a broke ankle. You go out in that." He gestured to the window, now a solid white rectangle of driving snow. "And you'll lose a foot to frostbite, then you'll be an invalid." His logic was brutal and unassailable. She hated him for it. She hated him for his quiet competence, for the way he kept the fire fed, for the simple, nourishing stews he made that kept her alive, and she hated herself for needing it. But small kindnesses began to bridge the distance. Small cracks in the ice. He was blunt, but she realized he was also gentle. He changed the dressing on her ankle with rough but careful hands, his touch firm, impersonal, and clean. He brought her the cabin's single book, a worn copy of Shakespeare, and placed it on the cot without a word. When she coughed, a dry, racking sound from the cold she'd taken, he appeared with a cup of hot water and honey, the steam rising. "Where did you get honey?" she asked, her voice raw. "Got a bee tree I rob in the summer," he said, turning away. "It'll help the throat." The storm broke on the third day, the wind dying to a whisper, replaced by a vast, ringing silence. The world outside was buried in white, the snowdrifts piled halfway up the cabin's single window. Elias was outside, clearing a path to his woodshed. Clara, propped up on the cot, watched him. He moved with a relentless, steady rhythm, his shoulders powerful as he shoveled the heavy snow. She was examining her splint when he came back in, stamping the snow from his boots. "You set a bone well," she said, the first words she had offered that were not a demand or a complaint. He grunted, hanging his coat. "Seen enough broke bones?" She waited. He was mending a bridle. His head bent over the leather, the silence stretched. "I haven't properly thanked you, Mr. Crow." "No need. Couldn't leave you to the wolves. My name is Clara Halloway." He stopped his work. He was very still. After a long moment, he looked up, his pale eyes searching her face. "Halloway, from the High Prairie Ranch, Samuel Halloway's girl." She nodded, surprised. "You knew my father?" "Didn't know him. Knew of him." He went back to his work, his fingers testing a strap. "Heard he was an honest man. Sold him a horse, maybe 10 years ago. He paid what he said he would. Rare thing." That small praise of her father, the simple acknowledgement of his honesty, felt like a gift. It opened a door she hadn't realized was closed. "He died last winter," she said, her voice quiet. "A fall. My husband died the year before." Elias just nodded, his hands still. He did not offer pity. He did not say he was sorry. He just listened, which was more of a comfort. She looked at him, truly looked at him, not as a jailer, but as a person. The scar on his face, the way he favored his right leg when he walked. "You said you'd seen enough broken bones." "The war?" His hands clenched on the leather. "Gettysburg, and the wilderness. I saw my share." "You lost much," she stated. It was not a question. "I lost enough," he said, his voice flat, final. The snow was too deep to travel. Even after the storm, they were trapped, the mountain paths impassable. The world was reduced to the 4 walls of the cabin, but the rhythm of their days changed. The tension eased, replaced by a quiet routine. Clara refused to lie idle. Her ankle was still useless, but her hands were strong. "If I am to eat your food, I will earn it," she declared. Elias looked at her, a flicker of something, amusement, respect, in his eyes. "Suit yourself." He brought her a bucket of potatoes and a knife. She peeled them, her hands moving with practiced speed. He brought her his mending pile. She stitched his torn shirts and darned his socks. Her neat, even stitches a small point of pride. He brought wood inside, and she would sit on the floor, her splinted leg propped on a pillow of blankets, and split the kindling with a small hatchet, the sharp thwack a satisfying, productive sound. They cooked together, a silent dance in the small space. He would handle the heavy pot. She would chop the vegetables. They ate in silence, sitting at the small, rough table, the only sound the scrape of spoons against tin bowls. It was in this shared, quiet work that the distance truly began to dissolve. They had built a rhythm. One night, the fire was burning low, and the cabin was filled with a warm, drowsy light. Elias was carving a piece of wood, the knife in his scarred hands moving with surprising delicacy. Clara was rubbing tallow into a pair of his stiff boots, working the grease into the seams. The silence felt comfortable now, worn as an old coat. "You asked about the war," Elias said, his voice so low she almost missed it. He was staring into the fire, not at her. "You asked what I lost." Clara stopped her work, her hands greasy. "My brother," he said, his voice flat, devoid of emotion. "His name was Isaac. He was 17. He followed me in, thought it was a grand adventure. He didn't follow me out. Took a ball in the gut at Cold Harbor. Took him 3 days to die. I was there." He turned the piece of wood over in his hands. "When I got back, my wife, Anna, she was gone. Took the consumption while I was playing soldier. Came home to an empty house. Just empty. Nothing but the land. And the land was empty, too." He said it all in that same flat, low voice, as if reciting a list of supplies. But Clara heard the ocean of grief beneath the ice. She saw the man who had come back from hell to find his home gone, and had been walking alone, ever fleeing. She found herself speaking, her voice a near whisper, confessing something she had never told another living soul, not even her father. "Tom and I, my husband, we were married a year. I was with child." She stared at her own hands, at the dark grease on them. "A boy. We were going to name him Samuel, after my father. He came too soon. He was so small." She swallowed, the memory a physical ache in her throat. "He didn't breathe. I held him. He was perfect, but he never made a sound. Just quiet. I held him until he was cold. Tom buried him under the big pine tree on the ridge. He never talked about it again, and I never stopped." She was not crying. The wound was too old, too deep for tears. It was a hollow place inside her. She looked up. Elias was watching her, his face unreadable in the firelight. He had stopped carving. He understood. He did not offer her pity. He offered her the respect of his own brokenness. A few nights later, the air was sharp and cold. The full moon lit the snow-covered world outside, making the single window a square of pale blue light. They sat by the fire, the day's chores done. Clara had been watching him, his quiet, his solitude. She thought of his words. "Empty." "Why do you stay up here, Elias?" she asked, her voice soft. "So far from everyone?" He looked up from the flames. He seemed to consider the question, or perhaps consider her. He had seen her pride, her anger, her grief. He knew her secrets. "I tried town," he said finally. After I came back, and after I tried to work, I tried to be around people, but it was loud, too many voices." He leaned forward, resting his scarred forearms on his knees. "People talk. They want things from you, or they want to tell you things. They lie about the war, the ones who weren't there. They lie about God. They lie about their neighbors. They lie about themselves. It's a noise, a constant noise." He looked past her, out the window at the clean, white, silent snow. "Up here," he said. "The wind blows, the creek freezes, the wolves howl. But it's all true. The world's quieter without lies." His words settled over her, a profound truth. She thought of Silas Meeker, his smooth, oiled voice, his lies of protection and comfort. She thought of the town, the averted eyes, the polite lies of the judge. Elias had not lied to her. He had been blunt, even brutal, but he had been true. She looked at his hand, resting on his knee near the firelight. The skin was rough, calloused, the knuckles split like her own, and across them, The long, pale scar she had seen before. A saber cut, maybe, or something worse. She felt a sudden, sharp, aching need to connect, to show him that she understood, to prove that not all touch was a lie, or a taking, or a prelude to pain. Slowly, her heart pounding, she reached out. Her hand trembled slightly. She laid her fingers gently on the back of his hand, her skin against his, her fingertips just brushing the edge of the old scar. Elias froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. He stopped breathing. He did not look at her, but stared, frozen, at the fire. He was a man braced for a blow, a man who had learned that touch was only ever a precursor to pain. But he didn't pull away. She just rested her hand there. A question, an acknowledgement, a silent, shared breath in the quiet. His skin was rough, but beneath it, she felt the warmth, the pulse of his life. After a moment that stretched for an eternity, he let out his breath, a long, slow sigh. He turned his hand, just slightly, a movement so small she almost missed it, his palm pressing faintly against her fingers. It was an answer. Then, gently, she pulled her hand back. Neither of them spoke. That night, she lay on the cot, the cabin dark save for the red, pulsing glow of the embers in the hearth. Elias lay on his bedroll on the floor, a respectable distance away, his breathing a deep, even rhythm. She thought he was asleep. But the dam had broken. The touch, his confession, her own. The quiet intimacy of the last few days had dismantled the numb, frozen wall she had built around herself. Now, everything flooded in. She saw her ranch house, the door bolted against her. She heard the sneering laugh of Meeker's man. She saw her mother's china, shattered in the snow. Her father's legacy, her home, her entire life, gone, stolen by a small, soft man's pride. And the shame of her failure, the shame of her helplessness. Here she was, a cripple, a beggar, living on the charity of a stranger, a broken woman, saved by a broken man. A sob choked her, hot and sharp. She buried her face in the rough, smoky blanket, clenching her teeth, trying to be silent, but the grief was too big. It tore out of her, a silent, racking storm that shook her whole body. She cried for her lost land. She cried for her dead child. She cried for her future, which was a vast, empty, terrifying white, just like the snow outside. Across the small, dark room, Elias lay on his back, his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. He heard her. He heard the sound of a heart breaking in the darkness, and it was a sound he knew well. He clenched his jaw, his own scars, old and new, aching in sympathy. His first instinct was to go to her, to offer, what, comfort? He had none to give. Words were lies. He said nothing. He did not move. He just lay there, a silent witness, and let her grieve. He knew it was a storm that had to be weathered alone. The next morning, the silence in the cabin was heavy, brittle. Clara's eyes were swollen, her face pale. She was ashamed of her weakness, terrified that her breakdown had shattered the fragile peace they had built. She couldn't look at him. Elias rose before dawn, as usual. He put on his coat and went out. He was gone for a long time, more than an hour. Clara was alone, and a new cold fear gripped her. Had she driven him away? Had her display of weakness disgusted him? Was he leaving her here? She was still a prisoner, her ankle a throbbing reminder. The door opened, and he came in, a blast of frigid air following him. He was covered in snow, his beard frosted white. He didn't look at her, just stamped his boots and went to the fire, brushing the snow from his coat. He warmed his hands, his back to her. The silence was unbearable. Then he turned. He walked over to her cot. She flinched, pulling the blanket higher. He stopped in front of her. He reached into his coat pocket and held out his closed, scarred fist. He held it there for a moment, then opened it. Lying in his rough, calloused palm was a small, smooth piece of wood. It was the piece he had been carving. It was a bird, a wren. Maybe simple, but perfect. The head was cocked. The wings were slightly spread, as if it were just about to take flight. The wood was pale, sanded so smooth it seemed to glow. Clara stared at it, then up at his face. His expression was unreadable, his eyes clear and steady. He reached down and gently took her hand, turning it palm up. He placed the small wooden bird in her palm. His fingers were rough, calloused, and surprisingly warm. "Storms broke," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But the pass is snowed in. You'll be here a while yet. Best get used to it." He let go of her hand and turned, going back to the fire to stack the wood he had brought in. Clara sat on the cot, the cabin silent again. She looked down at the small bird in her hand. It was solid, real. It was a promise, not of rescue, not of salvation. It was a promise of endurance. It was comfort, offered in the only way he knew how. Comfort without a single lie. She closed her hand around it, the smooth wood pressing into her palm, and for the first time since Meeker had ridden to her ranch, she felt a flicker of something other than fear. It was not hope. It was something harder. It was resolve. The wooden bird was a solid weight in her hand. Clara held it for the rest of that day. Its smooth, simple shape a silent comfort. It was a promise of endurance. The next morning she tested her ankle. The swelling had gone down. The skin a mottled map of purple and yellow. When she put a little weight on it, the pain was a dull, angry throb. Not the sharp, blinding agony of before. She was not a prisoner. She was a patient, and she was done being a patient. When Elias came in from his morning check of his traps, carrying 2 rabbits, she was sitting on the edge of the cot, her splinted foot resting on the floor. She had dressed in her own clothes, the canvas trousers and flannel shirt she'd been wearing when she fell, now washed by her own hands in a bucket of snow melt and dried by the fire. "I am going outside," she announced. It was not a request. Elias stopped by the door, his eyes taking in her stance. He looked at her ankle, then at her face. He saw the resolve there. He'd seen it in her that first day she woke up, a core of stubborn pride that had been momentarily buried by grief. "It's 20 degrees, he said, hanging the rabbits, "and the snow is 3 feet deep. You have a path to the woodpile, and to the lean-to where you keep your horse. I will not be idle any longer. What do you plan to do?" "Help! I ate your food. I slept in your bed. I will work." He watched her for a long moment, his face unreadable. Then he gave a short, single nod. "Your boot was cut off. You'll need these." He went to a small chest in the corner, one she had assumed held his own things. He pulled out a pair of thick, wool-lined moccasins. They were old, but the leather was soft and well-oiled, the stitching tight. They looked small. "My wife's," he said, his voice flat. He tossed them onto the cot. "They'll be big, but they'll keep your foot from freezin'." Clara looked at the moccasins. A tremor went through her. This was not a small offering. This was a piece of his past, of the empty house he had returned to. She picked one up. It was light and warm. "Thank you, Elias." He just grunted and turned to skin the rabbits. "You'll need a crutch." He made one while she ate the breakfast of oatmeal he'd prepared. He took a sturdy pine branch, sawed it to the right height, and nailed a crosspiece at the top, which he then wrapped in a strip of spare canvas. It was simple, rough, and perfectly functional, like the man himself. Her first steps were a trial. The cabin floor was uneven, and the crutch was awkward. But she was determined. She bundled herself in her coat and wrapped one of his spare blankets around her shoulders like a shawl. She followed him out into the blinding white day. The cold was a slap in the face, a clean, sharp, vital thing. It felt glorious. She took a deep breath, the frigid air burning her lungs, and felt truly alive for the first time in weeks. Her world had been the four walls of the cabin. Now, it expanded. She saw the full scope of his small homestead. The cabin was nestled in a high meadow, protected on three sides by a thick stand of pine and aspen. Below the meadow, the mountains fell away into a vast, white valley. The view was staggering, a terrifying, beautiful ocean of snow and rock and sky. It made her old ranch, her prairie, feel small and tame. "This is where you live," she whispered, her words pluming in the air. "It's where I stay," he corrected. He was already at work, shoveling the path to the lean-to. Her insistence on helping changed their rhythm. She was clumsy at first, a one-legged burden, but she learned. She hobbled to the lean-to, where his big buckskin horse, steady as a rock, watched her with mild curiosity. Elias taught her how to groom the horse, how to check its hooves, how to measure its feed. "You feed him before you feed yourself," he said, his voice firm. "He's your legs in this country. You don't take care of him, you die." She learned to feed the chickens he kept in a small, warm coop built against the cabin wall, their clucking a cheerful, domestic sound in the vast wilderness. She learned to patch the fencing, a task she could do sitting on a log, her hands busy with the cold wire and pliers while Elias reset the posts. Her ankle healed, day by day. The throb receded. She began to put more weight on it. First, she shed the crutch, using a walking stick. Then, a week later, she shed the stick, walking with a pronounced, painful limp, but walking. She took over the cooking. She had a better hand with seasoning than he did, and she stretched their supplies, making stews that lasted for days, baking a dense, serviceable bread in his Dutch oven over the coals. She was a rancher's daughter. She knew how to make something from nothing. They worked, they ate, they slept. The short, bright days were filled with a silent companionship of shared labor. The long, dark nights were filled with something else. They shared meals at the small table, the firelight dancing on the log walls, and in the quiet, with the wind howling outside, they began to talk. It was awkward at first. Two people who had learned to live inside their own heads, their words stiff from disuse, but they found a language. He would tell her about the tracks he'd found in the snow. A marten, a snowshoe hare, the heavy print of a bull elk. He spoke of the land as if it were a living thing, a creature he respected and understood. She, in turn, told him about her ranch, about her father. She told him about the drought, about the way the grass cured in the summer, about the way the light hit the prairie at sunset, turning the land to gold. She spoke of her small herd, of the calf she'd saved from a frozen creek, of the pride she'd felt riding her own land. They spoke of the past, but in careful, guarded ways. They circled the deep wounds, the empty places, the names they could not yet say in the dark. But in talking about the land, the horses, the work, they were talking about themselves. There was a longing in the air, a tension that was as real as the cold. It was in the way his eyes would sometimes linger on her when she was by the fire, her hair coming loose from its braid. It was in the way her breath would catch when he brushed past her in the small cabin, his sleeve grazing her arm, his scent of pine and smoke and clean male sweat filling her senses. He was a man, she was a woman. They were alone. It was a simple, terrifying fact. They were both scarred. They were both wary. They were both intensely, achingly lonely. One evening, the wind, which had been a constant companion, rose to a new and terrifying pitch. It wasn't a moan, it was a scream. It clawed at the cabin, rattling the door in its frame, sending puffs of smoke back down the chimney. The world outside was a maelstrom of driving, tearing snow. They had eaten, the tin plates cleaned and put away. Clara was restless. She limped to the window, rubbing a small circle of frost from the glass, but there was nothing to see but a swirling, violent white. "It sounds angry," she said. Elias was sharpening his axe, the rhythmic shing 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 of the whetstone a small, steady sound against the storm. "It's just wind. It doesn't feel. It just is." "Like a man," she said, the words slipping out, sharper than she intended. He stopped his work. The silence that fell was heavy, charged. "Meeker," she said, her voice a low, hard thing. "Silas Meeker, the banker who took my ranch." Elias set the axe and the stone down, his movements deliberate. He turned on his stool to face her, his expression guarded. "What about him?" Clara turned from the window. The firelight caught the fury in her eyes, the tracks of old, unshed tears. "You think he just took the land? You think it was just business, debt? You think that's why I was out there in the snow?" "That's what you said. He called your note." "He did," she laughed, a short, bitter sound that was swallowed by the wind. "But not before he offered to save me. He came to my home. He sat at my table, and he told me I was living in filth, that I was delicate, that I needed polishing." Elias's hands, resting on his knees, slowly clenched into fists. "He proposed marriage," Clara whispered, the shame of it a hot coal in her throat. "He said if I married him, my debt would be his, the land would be his, I would be his." She was shaking now, not from cold, but from a rage that had been frozen inside her for weeks. "I told him to get out. I told him I would rather burn the ranch down than be touched by him. He did not like that. He told me I was proud, a flaw in a woman." "He's a son of a bitch," Elias said, his voice a low growl. "That's not the worst of it." Clara's voice broke. She sank onto the small stool opposite him, her hands covering her face. The wind shrieked, a perfect echo of the feeling in her soul. "He didn't just take the ranch. Elias, he shamed me. He didn't just want the land. He wanted to break me, to prove I was nothing without him." Elias waited. He knew this was the heart of it. This was the poison. "When I was after they threw me out," she continued, her voice muffled by her hands, "I wouldn't go to town. I wouldn't take the sheriff's pity. I knew Meeker would be there, waiting. But I heard the feed store owner, Mr. Henderson. His wife is a gossip. She told my neighbor. She told her what Meeker was saying, in the saloon, to anyone who would listen." She dropped her hands, her face pale, her eyes burning. "He told them I was unmanageable, that I was strange, that my father had spoiled me. He said," she choked on the word, "he said I was property gone wild, like a horse that needed to be broke." There it was, the final, filthy humiliation, the reduction of her to a thing, an animal. Elias went very still. The color drained from his face, leaving the scar on his temple a stark, angry white. A cold, terrible fury rose in his eyes, a look she had never seen before, the look of a man who had seen battle, who knew how to kill, and who was, for a split second, considering it. The air in the cabin crackled, growing colder than the storm. He looked at her, at the shame and rage warring on her face, and his own, carefully controlled world, his world of silence and truth, was violated by the lie. He stood up, his body rigid, and for a moment Clara thought he was going to smash his fist into the log wall. He took 2 steps toward the fire, his back to her, fighting a battle she could only guess at. He was breathing, hard, through his nose. He fought for control. He fought the ghosts of his own past, the rage that had sent him to the mountains, the violence he kept leashed. When he finally spoke, his voice was a blade, cold and restrained. "He won't touch you again." It was not a comfort. It was a vow, a promise of violence that frightened and thrilled her at the same time. "Elias," she whispered, I don't want you to—" He turned, the fury banked, but not gone. "I know, I'm not—" He's not worth the rope. He looked at her, his gaze intense, possessive in a way that was nothing like Meeker's. It was not ownership. It was protection. He called you property. He's the animal. He picked up his axe and the whetstone and went back to his work, his movements hard, sharp, and final. The conversation was over, but the air in the cabin had changed forever. The next day, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world that was scoured clean, the sky a deep, aching blue. Elias was quiet, but his silence was different. It was watchful. After their midday meal, he took his rifle from the pegs on the wall. It was a heavy, beautiful weapon, the stock dark and smooth, the barrel a clean, blue-black. "Come on," he said. "Where?" "Outside. You need to learn this." He led her to a small clearing behind the cabin, a natural amphitheater backed by a high wall of rock. He set up 3 pine cones on a fallen log, maybe 50 yards away. "You said your father left a rifle," he said. "A Winchester. I used it. I can shoot." "You can shoot at rustlers from a distance. Can you stop a man who is 3 feet away from you? A man who means to do you harm?" His question hung in the still, cold air. She thought of Meeker. She thought of his soft hands. I don't know." "You need to know." He handed her the rifle. It was heavy, heavier than her Winchester. "This is a Sharps. It'll stop a buffalo. It'll stop a man." He stood behind her, his presence a wall of warmth. "Show me how you hold it." She shouldered the rifle. It felt awkward. He stepped in, his voice a low rumble by her ear. "No, your stance is wrong. You're bracing for a friend. You brace for an enemy. Feet apart. Lean into it. Let the rifle be a part of you." He put his hand on her shoulder, correcting her stance. His touch was impersonal, the touch of a teacher, but it sent a jolt through her. He moved his hand to her arm, showing her how to tuck the stock tight. "You fight the recoil. It'll break your shoulder. You become one with it. It's just a push. Now, breathe. Breathe out. All the way. Squeeze the trigger on the empty. Don't pull it." He was close. She could smell the smoke from the fire on his clothes, the faint, clean scent of the cold on his skin. She was intensely aware of his body, his strength. He gave her a single cartridge. "1 shot. Hit the middle cone." She loaded the rifle, the metal smooth and cold under her fingers. She raised it, found the cone in her sights. She leaned in. Just as he'd said, she breathed out. She squeezed. The roar of the rifle was deafening in the silence. The recoil was a solid, brutal kick, but she held her stance, and it was just a push. The middle pine cone exploded in a small cloud of snow and bark. She lowered the rifle, her shoulder aching, her heart pounding with a fierce, wild joy. Elias was watching her. Not the target. A slow, faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was the first time she had seen him almost smile. "Good," he said, and the single word was more praise than she had ever heard. He handed her another cartridge. "Again, the one on the left." She hit it, and the one on the right. 3 shots, 3 hits. "You're afraid," he said as she lowered the smoking rifle. "I'm not," she said, indignant. "I hit all 3. "You're afraid of him, of Meeker, of being weak. I can see it. It makes your hands shake before you shoot." "I am not afraid." "You are, and it's all right. Fear keeps you alive, but you can't let it own you. You can't let him own you." He tapped the rifle. "This is just iron and wood. The power is in you. You just have to aim it. You're not property. You're not wild. You're a woman with a rifle. Don't be afraid anymore." He took the Sharps from her, and their hands brushed. A spark, sharp and hot, passed between them. It was more than trust. It was more than companionship. It was a deep, emotional closeness that had been forged in shared silence, in confession, in the smoke of gunpowder. The tension that had been a low hum in the cabin for weeks became a taut, singing wire. That night, The fire was burning low. Clara had washed, her skin clean and scrubbed, her hair damp and loose down her back. Elias was sitting on his stool, his shirt off. He was mending a tear in it, his movements economical, the firelight gleaming on the hard, muscled ridges of his back and shoulders. Clara sat on her cot, pretending to read the Shakespeare, but her eyes were on him. She watched the play of muscle, the shadow and light, and she saw the scars. His back was a landscape of old pain, the pale, puckered mark of a bullet high on his left shoulder, a long, ropey scar that cut across his ribs, but it was the one on his chest that held her gaze. She had seen it before, when he changed his shirt, a deep, angry, star-shaped scar, just over his heart. It was not a bullet, it was not a blade, it looked like a brand, or a burn from shrapnel. He finished his sewing and turned, sensing her gaze. He did not reach for his shirt. He sat, exposed in the firelight, and met her eyes. He did not hide. She put the book down. Her heart was a drum in her chest. The question was there, in her eyes. He nodded, just once, giving her permission. She rose from the cot and crossed the small space between them. She knelt on the hearth rug, in front of him. She was so close she could feel the heat radiating from his skin. He smelled of soap and wood smoke. He did not move. He just watched her, his pale eyes full of 100 ghosts. "Elias," she whispered. She lifted her hand, her fingers trembling. She reached out, not for his hand, not for his shoulder, but for the scar. She laid her fingertips on the ruined skin over his heart. He froze. A deep, shuddering breath was torn from him, as if she had touched an open wound. His entire body went rigid, his eyes squeezed shut. This was a place of old, terrible pain. But he let her. He did not pull away. She traced the shape of it, her touch as light as a feather. She felt the heavy, thudding beat of his heart beneath the scarred tissue. He was so alive. "How?" she whispered. His eyes opened. They were dark, full of pain and a raw, desperate hunger. "The wilderness," he breathed. "A shell. My brother." He couldn't finish. She understood. This was not just his scar. It was his brother's. It was his wife's. It was all his loss, all his pain, centered in one place. She leaned in, her forehead resting against his collarbone. She closed her eyes, her hand still flat against his heart. She breathed in his scent. She felt the tremor that ran through his entire body. He lifted his hand, his scarred, rough hand, and buried it in her damp hair, his fingers clenching. He held her head, his touch desperate. "Clara," he said, her name a prayer, a curse. She tilted her head back. She looked up at him. His face was a map of such profound, aching loneliness that it broke her heart. And then they kissed. It was not a gentle kiss. It was a collision. It was slow and trembling and full of hesitation. But beneath it was all the pent-up ache of 2 lifetimes. It was the taste of salt and wood smoke and the iron of his rifle. His beard was rough against her skin, but his lips were impossibly soft. It was a kiss of questions. "Can you? Will you? Are you real?" She answered by kissing him back, by opening her mouth to him, by putting her other hand on his shoulder, her fingers digging into his warm, hard skin. He groaned, a low, animal sound, and his other arm came around her, pulling her against his bare chest. He was so strong, so warm. He held her as if she were the only solid thing in a world that was spinning apart. Then, as suddenly as it began, he tore his mouth from hers. He was breathing, hard, his eyes wild. He pushed her back, not hard, but firmly, holding her at arm's length. "No," he whispered, his voice ravaged. "Clara, no." "Elias," she breathed, confused, aching. "You deserve better," he said, his voice a raw, broken thing. He looked away from her, at the fire. "You deserve A whole man, a clean man. Not this. He gestured to his scars, to the cabin, to his whole broken life. You deserve better than a broken man. Clara looked at his face, at the self-loathing, the fear. She saw a man who believed he was worthless, who believed his scars ran so deep he was poison. She reached up and put her hand on his rough-shaven jaw, forcing him to look at her. Her hand was steady. Her eyes were clear. Then let's break together, she whispered. The last of his control shattered. He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers again. And this time there was no hesitation. It was a kiss of hunger, of need, of desperation. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing, his mouth never leaving hers, and carried her the 2 steps to the hearthrug. He laid her down on the warm, worn wool, the firelight painting her skin in shades of gold and red. He was above her, his body a taut, shaking line of want. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his eyes searching hers, giving her one last chance to flee. For an answer, she reached up and pulled him down. They made love near the fire. It was raw, and it was gentle, and it was overwhelming. He was clumsy, his movements hesitant, his body remembering a language it had not spoken in a decade. He was a man dying of thirst, and she was water. Clara, who had only known the hurried, dutiful fumblings of her young husband, was the one who guided him. She was not delicate. She was not property. She was a woman. She met his desperation with her own strength. She held his face. She whispered his name. She showed him that this, too, was a kind of truth. He was overcome. The intensity of it, the simple, staggering fact of being touched with kindness, with want, was too much. When he finally found his release, he cried out, a short, sharp sound, and he collapsed against her, burying his face in her hair, his body shaking with a storm that had nothing to do with the wind. After, they lay in silence. The fire crackled. The wind howled outside, a distant, lonely sound, but inside there was only warmth. He was heavy on top of her, but she didn't mind. She held him, her arms wrapped around his sweat-slicked, scarred back, her fingers tracing the map of his pain. He held her, his arms locked around her, as if he was terrified she would dissolve, that she was a dream. He had offered her no promises. She had asked for none. It was not a beginning. It was not an end. It was just warmth, and in their cold, broken world, warmth was everything. The melt began in March. It did not come as a gentle thaw, but as a slow, steady retreat of the white. The snow sank, day by day, compacting, turning granular and gray, pulling back from the south-facing slopes. The first sound of spring in the high country was not a bird, but the sound of dripping water, a high, thin music that played from dawn until the world froze again at dusk. The smell of the air changed. The sharp, sterile bite of ice was replaced by the rich, dark scent of damp earth, wet stone, and the sharp tang of pine resin. Clara's ankle had mended with the same slow, stubborn pace. The pain had receded from a sharp, agonizing throb to a dull, distant ache, and finally, to a memory. She had shed the crutch, then the walking stick. Now, she walked with only the slightest hitch in her step, a small limp that only showed when she was tired, a physical reminder of what she had survived. She was no longer a patient. She was a partner. Her body, which had been lean and strained on the ranch, was now hard. She woke before Elias, her internal clock set to the pale light of dawn. She fed the chickens, her hands moving with a new, sure purpose. She helped Elias groom his buckskin, her voice a low murmur to the animal, her hands firm and knowing as she brushed him down. She had taken over the cooking entirely, her skill at stretching their dwindling winter supplies, salt pork, beans, and the last of the flour, a source of quiet pride. She learned to split wood, not with the brute force she had first tried, but with the economical, sharp crack that Elias had taught her, using the weight of the axe, letting the tool do the work. In the evenings, she sat by the fire, but not with a book. She medended. She oiled his tack. She even learned to reload cartridges, her hands steady as she measured the powder, seated the lead, her movements a mirror of his own precise economy. And in that shared work, in the quiet, simple rhythm of survival, she found something she had never expected. She felt free. There was no judgment in the mountains. The wind did not care about her debt. The trees did not whisper about her shame. Here, her worth was measured in her work, in her endurance. She was not property gone wild. She was a woman who could splint a fence, shoot straight, and survive a blizzard. Elias had changed, too, the presence of another person, another life. In his sanctuary had breached his walls. He spoke more, not in long speeches, but in small observations. He pointed out a hawk riding the thermals. He showed her which roots were edible, which mosses could be used to pack a wound. He was a man unthrunking, his own long winter beginning to break. The nights were a different country. The raw, desperate hunger of that first time by the fire had settled into a deep, knowing intimacy. There was a quiet possessiveness in the way he would reach for her in the dark, his hand finding hers, his body a solid, warm wall against her back. It was a comfort, profound and simple, that asked for no promises and offered no lies. One evening in April, they sat on the rough-hewn bench outside the cabin, watching the sun set. The valley below was a sea of purple shadow, the air so clear it felt like a held breath. "The pass will be clear in a week," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. He was carving a new handle for a tool, the knife stroke smooth and sure. Clara's hands, busy mending a seam in his coat, stilled. "The pass, the way down, the world." "You could go," he said. He didn't look at her, his eyes on the wood. "Town's a hard ride, but you could make it. See the judge. Try to—" He let the sentence die. They both knew the judge was Meeker's man. Clara looked at her own hands, at the calluses forming over the cracks. "Go where, Elias? To town, to be—" "What? A beggar, a laundress at the boarding house, taking Mrs. Gable's pity? I have nothing." "You have your name," he said, so quietly she almost missed it. "My name," she said, the word bitter. "He took that too, or tried." Elias set the knife down. He turned to her, the light catching the silver in his beard, the pale blue of his eyes. "You could stay," he said. The words hung in the cold, clear air. Clara's heart, which she had thought hardened, gave a painful lurch. "Stay? Here, with me. It's not a ranch. It's not grand, but it's safe. It's true." He fumbled for the words. This man who lived by silence. "There's land. We could build, add a room, raise horses. We could build something new." It was the most he had ever offered. It was everything, a life, a future, a partnership. Not of paper and law, but of work and survival. She looked at him, at his scarred, kind face, at the man who had brought her back from the ice, who had seen her broken and had not turned away. She loved him. The realization was as sharp and clear as the mountain air. She loved his silence, his truth, his scarred hands. And she wanted to say yes. The word was on her tongue, a desperate, yearning thing. But as she looked out at the vast, beautiful wilderness, she did not see a new home. She saw a ghost. She saw her father's ranch, the porch with the peeling paint, the line of cottonwoods by the creek. She saw her mother's china, shattered in the snow. "He's still there," she whispered, her voice thick. "He's sitting in his warm office, smoking his cigars, on my land." "It's not your land anymore." "Clara," Elias said, his voice gentle but firm. "It's just dirt. He can have the dirt. He can't have you." But he does, she insisted, the old anger rising. As long as he has that land, as long as he won, he still has a piece of me. He's still laughing. I can't build a new life. Elias, not on a foundation of running away. It still haunts me. He saw the truth in her face. He saw that the wound was still open, still festering. He had offered her a future, but she was still chained to the past. He sighed, a sound of frustration and deep, aching tenderness. He picked up his knife and went back to carving, the silence between them heavy again. The world intruded 2 weeks later, in the form of a man named Jedediah Sipes. He was a traveling peddler, a thin, wiry man with a face like a dried apple and a wagon full of notions, tinware, and news. His arrival was a shock. They heard the jangle of his mule's harness before they saw him, a strange, worldly sound in their high, quiet meadow. Elias met him on the path, his rifle held loosely in one hand, his stance wary. "Howdy, Crow," the peddler chirped, seemingly unfazed by the weapon. "Heard you'd hold up here. Folks in Wyndham said a bear got you." "Folks talk too much," Elias rumbled. "What do you want, Jed?" "Just making my rounds. Spring's here." He gestured to his wagon. "Got coffee, real arbuckles, got flour, bacon, needles, thread, even some canned peaches. 10 cents on the dollar. Just for you." Elias looked back at the cabin. Clara had come to the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Coffee. The word was a luxury, a dream. The peddler's eyes snapped to her. His cheerful, wrinkled face went slack. He stared, his mouth open. "Merciful heavens," he breathed. It can't be." Clara stepped out into the sun, her chin high. "Mr. Sipes, it's been a long time." "Mrs. Halloway," he whispered, his eyes wide. He took off his hat, crushing it in his hands. "Clara, ma'am, we all thought you was dead. We thought the storm." "The storm was bad," Elias cut in, his voice a clear warning. "But she's not. We need coffee, and flour, and salt." The transaction was tense. Clara insisted on trading, offering her last possession of value, a small silver locket of her mother's. Elias's face tightened, but he let her. Jedediah Sipes, his eyes darting between the hard, scarred man and the proud, resurrected woman, made the trade, his hands shaking slightly. He was a man who held a bomb that was about to explode. As he packed the locket away, his professional gossip's nature won out over his fear. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low. You don't know what they're saying in town. You can't." "I can imagine," Clara said, her voice like ice. "No, ma'am, you can't." He looked at Elias, then back at Clara. "It's Meeker. He's done you a terrible wrong." "He took my ranch." "Oh, it's worse than that. He's selling it. Got a big deal with the railroad. They're paying him a fortune for the water rights. He's been in the saloon, buying rounds for everyone. Boasting." "Boasting about what?" Elias asked, his voice deadly. Jedediah swallowed. "Boasting about her, about how he offered to save her, and she was too proud. And he said," the peddler looked at his boots. "He said, 'No woman tells me no.' He said it to the whole town. 'No woman tells me no and gets away clean.'" Clara felt the blood drain from her face, the freedom she had felt, the clean mountain air. It all vanished, replaced by a filthy, humid shame. And that ain't all," Jedediah stammered, warming to his terrible news. "He spread the rumor. He let it be known that you weren't right in the head, that you'd run off. He told folks, he told the sheriff, that you'd probably gone to Cheyenne, to one of the houses on the row." He wouldn't say the word. He didn't have to. "Whore." The word that had been whispered was now shouted. The slander was not just an insult. It was a public declaration. He had not just taken her land, He had taken her name, her reputation, her past, and her future, and he had ground them into the mud, all to satisfy his wounded pride. "He called me property," Clara whispered, her voice trembling, but not with fear. "Now he calls me a whore." Elias's hand was a white-knuckled claw on his rifle. "Get out, Jed," he growled. "Take your goods and get off my land. And you don't say a word. You haven't seen her. You understand me?" "Yes, sir, Mr. Crow." "Not a word. I'm gone." The peddler scrambled onto his wagon, whipped his mule, and fled, the wagon jangling frantically as it disappeared down the pass. The silence that he left was 1,000 times worse than the storm. It was poisoned. Clara stood on the path, her hands clenched at her sides, her body rigid. The mountains, her sanctuary, now felt like a cage. She was not free. She was in exile. She was a pariah. "Clara," Elias said, his voice gentle. "He will not win," she said, her voice a low, terrifying monotone. "He will not. I am going to town." She turned and marched to the cabin. She grabbed the Sharp's rifle, the one he had taught her to use. She checked the load. "Clara, stop!" Elias was in the doorway, blocking her path. He was not gentle now. He was a rock. "You are not going." "Get out of my way, Elias." "No, you are not thinking. You are only feeling. You walk in there with that rifle. What do you think happens? You think you can just shoot him? He's a rich man. He's the bank. He owns the judge. He owns the sheriff. You go in there screaming. He'll have you arrested for vagrancy, or for threatening him. He'll throw you in a cell, and it'll prove every lie he's ever told. You'll be exactly what he says you are, property gone wild." His words were brutal, and they were true. She stopped, the rifle heavy in her hands, her body shaking with a rage so profound it left her weak. "What am I supposed to do?" she cried, the tears finally coming, hot and angry. "Am I supposed to stay up here, hide, let him do this? Let that lie be the last word? Am I supposed to be a ghost while he gets rich on my father's grave?" "I don't know," Elias said, his own voice rough with frustration. I don't know the answer, but this," he touched the barrel of the rifle. "This is not it. This is what he wants. He wants you to be broken. He wants you to be crazy. You do this, you prove him right." She sank onto the cot, the rifle clattering to the floor. The fight went out of her, replaced by a cold, weary despair. He had won. Meeker had truly, finally won. Elias watched her, his heart aching. He had wanted to build a new world with her, but the old one, the one of lies, had reached up and pulled her back down. She sat in silence for a long time, the only sound her own ragged breathing. The sun moved across the floor. Elias sat on his stool, cleaning his revolver, his movements a sharp, metallic click, snick, click. Finally, Clara looked up. Her eyes were red, but they were not broken. They were cold. They were the color of steel. "You're right," she said, her voice clear. "The rifle is not the answer, and I am not angry. Not anymore." She stood up. "I don't care about the ranch. Elias, he can have the dirt. He can have the money. I don't care. That's not what this is about." "Then what is it?" "It's about closure. It's about the truth. I am not going there to shoot him. I am not going there to beg for my land back. I am going to go to that town, and I am going to stand in the street, and I am going to look that man in the eye. I will not let that lie be the last word. I will not be a whore, and I will not be a ghost. I am Clara Halloway. My father was Samuel Halloway, and I will not let Silas Meeker erase us." She was not the trembling woman he had found in the snow. She was not the grieving patient. She was not even the angry, humiliated victim. She was a woman with a purpose, cold and hard as iron, and he had never loved her more. He saw the resolve in her. It was the same resolve that had made her walk out of her own home, the same resolve that had made her split wood on a broken ankle. It was he realized. The same resolve that had kept him alive in the wilderness. He slid the last cartridge into his revolver and spun the cylinder. Click, click, click. "All right," he said, his voice low. "We go. Not today. Not in a rage. We go when you are ready. We go in, we face him, and we come out." He stood up. "But we do it prepared. And we do it together." The next 3 days were a quiet, focused preparation. They were a unit, a 2-person army. They packed supplies, dried meat, hardtack, ammunition. Elias sharpened his knives. Clara cleaned the sharps until it gleamed. They spoke little, their movements a synchronized, silent dance of purpose. The air in the cabin was thick with dread, anticipation, and a deep, unspoken bond. On the final night, the cabin was quiet. Their packs were by the door. The rifles were leaning against the wall. Ready, the wind had picked up, a low, mournful sound in the pines. Clara was standing by the fire, her hand resting on the smooth wooden bird Elias had carved for her, which sat on the mantel. She was afraid. Her hands were steady. Her mind was clear. But her heart was a cold knot of fear. Efax found her. He came up behind her, not touching, just standing near, his presence a solid warmth. "He's just a man, Clara," he whispered. "A small, soft man." "He's a man with a town, and a judge, and a bank," she whispered back. "We have this, and each other." "It's enough." She turned to face him. She looked at his scarred face, at the pale, true eyes. She reached up and touched the scar on his temple, the one that mapped his own survival. "I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice a thread of sound. "I know." He covered her hand with his skin rough and warm. "But you won't be alone. You will never be alone again." He pulled her to him, and the kiss was not like the others. It was not the desperate collision of their first time, or the quiet comfort of the nights that followed. This was a claiming. It was a soldier's farewell and a new beginning. All at once, it was a promise, sealed in the firelight, a vow against the lies of the world. Their lovemaking was slow and deep and knowing. It was an anchor in the storm they were about to face. They held each other, 2 scarred, broken people who had found a new, stronger shape together. Later, as they lay in the dark, the embers of the fire pulsing red, Clara felt his lips against her hair. "I won't let you go alone," he whispered, his voice a low rumble, a vow that was more sacred than any church could offer. "No matter what, I'm with you." The next morning, they rose before dawn. The skies were a flat, bruised, unforgiving gray. The world was cold, the promise of spring forgotten. They saddled his buckskin, and a second, leaner horse Elias kept for a pack animal. Clara moved with a confident, sure grace. She settled the Sharps rifle into the scabbard on her saddle. She wore her canvas trousers, her father's old coat, and her hat pulled low. She was not a victim. She was a woman riding to war. Elias swung onto his own horse, his revolver a heavy, reassuring weight on his hip, his own rifle in its boot. They paused at the edge of the meadow, the cabin a small, dark shape behind them, their sanctuary. "Ready?" he asked. Clara looked down the pass, toward the distant, unseen town of Wyndham, toward the lies. "Ready," she said. They turned their horses' heads and rode, together, down into the gray. The town of Wyndham was a sea of mud. The spring thaw had turned the main street into a river of liquid, brown earth, deep enough to suck at the hooves of their horses. The gray sky pressed down, a heavy, wet blanket, promising more rain before the day was done. They rode in at noon, Clara on the buckskin, Elias on the pack horse, leading the other. They rode side by side, and the town, which had been bustling with midday errands, stopped. Heads turned. Conversations died. Mr. Henderson, standing on the boardwalk of his feed store, froze, a sack of grain halfway to his shoulder. Mrs. Gable, the proprietor of the boarding house, parted the lace curtains of her window, her face a mask of shock. They were not just staring, they were gaping. This was not the Clara Holloway who had been driven out, a broken, weeping widow. This woman was hard. She wore canvas trousers, a man's coat, and a hat pulled low, her hair braided in a thick, practical rope down her back. The Sharps rifle in her saddle boot was not for show. And the man beside her, he was Elias Crow, the ghost of the Bighorns, the man who had supposedly died in the war, or been killed by a bear, or had simply vanished. He was gaunt, scarred, and his pale, cold eyes swept the street with a look that dared anyone to speak. They were a terrifying, alien sight. The whispers started, a low, insectile sound that followed them down the street. The rumors of her being in Cheyenne, of her being a whore, died on their lips, replaced by a new, more immediate fear. She looked like a woman who had come back from the dead. They stopped, not at the boarding house, not at the feed store, but in the very center of town, directly in front of the First National Bank of Wyndham. The name of Silas Meeker was painted in crisp, black letters on the glass. Clara dismounted. Her boots hit the boardwalk with a solid, definitive sound. She did not limp. She stood for a moment, letting the town look, her hands, which she had thought would be trembling, perfectly still at her sides. Elias dismounted, his movement slower, economical. He did not tie the horses. He just looped the reins over the hitching rail, his back to the street, but every line of his body aware, watchful. "Clara." Sheriff Brody stood outside his office. 20 yards down, he had seen them ride in. He looked tired, his face deeply lined, his mustache drooping. He was chewing tobacco, his jaw working nervously. He walked toward them, not with a confident stride, but with the reluctant shuffle of a man doing a job he hated. He stopped 10 feet away, his gaze shifting from Clara to Elias, who had turned, silent as a shadow, to face him. "Crow," Brody said, his voice low, trying to keep it between them, though the whole street was listening. "You are courting a hangman's noose. You know that?" "Just in town on business, Sheriff," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. "Business?" Brody spat a stream of brown juice into the mud. "Meeker's got a warrant sworn. He wants her." He jutted his chin at Clara. "Arrested for vagrancy and fleeing debt. And he wants you arrested for harboring a fugitive. He's got the judge on his side. Son, you cannot win this." "A fugitive from what? Sheriff?" Clara's voice cut through the air, sharp and clear. It was not loud, but it carried, "A fugitive from his threats, a fugitive from his lies." "Clara, ma'am, please," Brody begged, his eyes darting to the bank. "Don't do this. He's a powerful man. Just ride out, and I'll tell him I missed you." "We appreciate your concern, Sheriff," Elias said, his tone flat. "But we have an appointment with Mr. Meeker." The door to the bank opened. Silas Meeker himself stepped out. He was dressed in his customary black suit, a fine silk waistcoat stretched across his soft middle. His bowler hat perched precisely on his slick, thinning hair. He had heard the commotion. He looked at the crowd, at the sheriff, and then at Clara and Elias. He smiled. It was a slow, indulgent, oily smile. He looked at Clara as one would look at a misbehaving child, or a horse that had kicked its stall. "Mrs. Holloway," he said, his voice carrying, full of false sympathy. "What a delightful surprise. We had all feared the worst. We heard." He let his gaze linger on Elias. "That you had found less reputable employ elsewhere." The veiled insult, the public declaration of the lie, hung in the air. The word whore was unspoken, but everyone heard it. Clara took 2 steps forward, until she was standing at the edge of the boardwalk, looking up at him. She was not angry. She was not afraid. She was a different element entirely. She was as cold and clean as the mountain ice. "You are a liar, Mr. Meeker," she said, her voice quiet, but it sliced through the street. The crowd gasped. A woman did not speak to Silas Meeker that way. Meeker's smile tightened. The color rose in his soft cheeks. "Now, Clara, you are hysterical. This mountain savage," he gestured with a dismissive hand at Elias, "has clearly addled your mind. You are distraught. You are not well." "I am perfectly well, Silas," she said, and the use of his first name was a slap. "I am, perhaps for the first time, seeing things clearly. You came to my home, did you not? You sat at my table." She was speaking to the crowd now, her voice rising, a clear, ringing declaration. "He sat in my kitchen, and he told me my life was filth. He told me I needed polishing. He offered me protection from my own debts." "This is slander," Meeker blustered, his face turning a shade redder. "Sheriff, this woman is mad. She is trespassing." "He proposed marriage," Clara shouted, and the word stunned the crowd into absolute silence. "He offered to save me in exchange for my land, my body, and my name. And when I refused him, when I told him I would rather burn my home to the ground than be owned by him, he threatened me." "Lies," Meeker shrieked. She's delirious." "He told me I was property gone wild." Clara continued, her voice gaining strength, a fire now lit behind her eyes. "And he kept his promise. He ruined me. He called in my notes. He pressured Mr. Henderson. Didn't you, Mr. Henderson? He threatened your notes until you cut off my credit. He pressured every man in this town until I was alone." Mr. Henderson, in the crowd, looked at his boots, his face a mask of shame. "He stole my ranch with the help of a weak judge," Clara said, "and then he told you all I had run off to be a whore. He did it to feed his own small, wounded pride, because a woman told him no." "That's enough," Meeker roared. "This is a fabrication. I did what the law allows. The foreclosure was legal. Her father's debt was real." "My father's debt was real," Clara agreed, her voice dropping, becoming dangerously quiet. "But your methods are not. You are not just a bully and a liar, Mr. Meeker. You are a common forger." She reached inside her coat. The crowd leaned in. Elias's hand moved, just slightly, to rest on the butt of his revolver. Clara pulled out a sheath of papers, tied with a string. She held them up. "You were so arrogant," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You were so sure of your power that you kept copies of your own crimes, locked in your own safe." Meeker's face went from red to a sickly, pale white. He knew what she held. "This," Clara said, untying the bundle and holding up the top letter, "is a letter, supposedly from my father, agreeing to a lien against the ranch for 10 times its value. It's a very good forgery. Silas, but my father was in Cheyenne that week, visiting his sister. He never signed this." She held up a second paper. "And this is my favorite. This is a letter to Judge Harrelson, from you, outlining the agreement you had, detailing the bonus he would receive from the railroad sale, in exchange for expediting the foreclosure, in exchange for ignoring my father's real will." Meeker let out a small, strangled sound. He looked at the crowd, who were staring at him now, their faces no longer curious, but hard, judgmental. He tried to laugh. It was a high, thin, cracking sound, like glass breaking. "Ridiculous. They are forgeries. She forged them. This savage." He pointed a shaking finger at Elias. "He broke into my bank. He stole. This is insanity. Sheriff, arrest this man for theft. Arrest this woman for—" "He's lying." Elias stepped forward. He had not spoken until now. His voice was not loud. It was a low, flat, cold sound, like wind over stone. He stood next to Clara, a solid wall of truth. "I have not been in your bank, Meeker," Elias said, "but I know your tactics. I have seen them." He looked at the crowd, his pale eyes pinning them. "You all have. You saw him do it to the Abernathy family, after old man Abernathy died. You saw him do it to the Millers, after the drought. He waits until you are weak, until you are grieving. He offers a kind hand, a small loan. He wraps you in paper chains, and when the time is right, he squeezes. He takes your land, he takes your hope, and you all look away, because you are afraid he will come for you next." He turned his gaze back to Meeker. "He did it to all of them. He did it to her. The only difference is, she refused to be broken. She refused to be bought. And she has a good memory." The implication was clear. Clara had told Elias where to look. She had told him what to find. "This is..." Meeker was sputtering, his eyes wild. "This is a conspiracy! This is not proof!" "Judge Harrelson, what is this commotion? What is this noise in the street?" A small, nervous man was bustling through the crowd. Judge Harrelson. He looked like a man who had been woken from a nap, his spectacles askew, his face pale and sweaty. Meeker saw him, and a last, desperate hope lit his eyes. "Judge, thank God! Tell these people! Tell them this is madness! Tell them the foreclosure was legal! Tell them!" Judge Harrelson looked at Meeker, his most powerful ally. He looked at the hard, angry faces of the townspeople, the people who were also in debt to Meeker. He looked at Elias, who looked like he could kill a man without blinking. And then he looked at Clara, who was walking toward him. She held out the second letter, the one with his name on it. "Judge Harrelson," she said, her voice calm, respectful. "This appears to be a letter from Mr. Meeker, detailing a bonus you were to receive. Is this your signature here at the bottom, acknowledging this agreement?" The judge froze. He stared at the paper as if it were a coiled rattlesnake. He saw his own looping, nervous signature. He was trapped. He was ruined. This, he stammered, pulling a handkerchief and wiping his face. This is... I was pressured." "Were you pressured, Judge?" Clara asked, her voice soft. "Or were you paid? Let's start with the other letter. The forged lien. Is that document, the one you used to take my ranch, valid?" The judge looked at Meeker, who was mouthing the word no at him, his face a mask of terror. The judge looked at the crowd. He was a weak man, and he did what all weak men do. He saved himself. "No," he whispered, his voice cracking. "No, the document. It was a forgery. I see that now. The foreclosure. It was based on false pretense. The documents, they are not valid." It was over. The town let out a collective breath. Silas Meeker made a sound. It was not a word. It was a low, animal growl of pure, unrestrained rage. His power was gone. His reputation was shattered. His money was worthless. He had been beaten, publicly, by property gone wild. He looked at Clara, at her calm, victorious face, and he snapped. But he did not lunge at Clara. He lunged at the man who had stood by her. He lunged at Elias. "You!" he screamed, his face a purple mask. "You savage! You ruined me!" He flew at Elias, his soft hands curled into claws, his intention to scratch, to tear. Elias did not move. He did not draw his gun. He did not even raise his hands to strike. He was a soldier. He had faced men with bayonets. A soft, raging banker was nothing. As Meeker's hands reached his chest, Elias simply shifted his weight. He caught Meeker's right wrist, turned, and used the man's own lunging, clumsy momentum against him. It was not a throw, it was a placement. Elias simply put him down. Silas Meeker fell, hard, not on the boardwalk, but off of it, landing face first in the deepest, filthiest part of the muddy street. He lay there, stunned, sputtering, covered in a thick brown, stinking coat of mud and refuse. The man who had called Clara's life filth was now the embodiment of it. There was a dead, perfect silence. Then Sheriff Brody moved. The weakness was gone from his face. He looked at the judge, who nodded frantically. He looked at Elias, who had not moved, his hands empty. He stepped down from the boardwalk and pulled Silas Meeker to his feet, the mud sucking at his boots. "Silas Meeker," the sheriff said, his voice loud and clear for the whole town to hear. "You are under arrest for forgery, for conspiracy to defraud, and—" he looked at Elias, then back at the sputtering banker, "for attempted assault." He clamped his hand on Meeker's arm. Meeker tried to pull away, but the sheriff was strong. The two deputies, who had been Meeker's men, now stood by the sheriff, their faces grim. The tide had turned. The crowd erupted. People were cheering. They were clapping Clara on the back. "We knew it, Mrs. Halloway. We never believed him. God bless you, ma'am." Their congratulations were as false as their whispers had been. Clara stood in the center of the storm, Elias a silent rock beside her. She was shaking. The adrenaline, the rage, the terror that had held her up, drained away, leaving her knees weak. She had won. The ranch, the land would be returned to her. She had won. But the victory felt strange. It tasted like ash. She looked at the bank, at the muddy street, at the faces of the townsfolk, their sudden, fawning respect more disgusting than their earlier judgment. She thought of the ranch, her home. She would have to go back to the house where her father and husband had died, back to the empty rooms, back to the neighbors who had believed, for 1 second, that she was a whore, back to the feed store owner who had turned her away. The land was tainted. The porch was tainted. The very air of the prairie felt poisoned. She couldn't breathe. The hands touching her, the voices praising her. It was too much. She felt a sob, hot and sharp, rising in her throat. She turned. She pushed through the crowd, ignoring their calls. "Mrs. Halloway, wait!" She did not run. She just retreated. She walked, her steps wooden, down the boardwalk, past the saloon, and turned into the alley. The alley smelled of stale beer, rotten food, and refuse. It was narrow, dark, and blessedly empty. She leaned against the rough, unfinished wood of the saloon wall, her legs finally giving way. She slid down, her trousers scraping the wood, and sat in the dirt, hidden from the world. And she cried. She wept, her body shaking with great, racking sobs. They were not tears of joy. They were tears of exhaustion, tears of grief. She cried for her father. She cried for her lost, shattered life. She cried because she had won, and in winning, had realized she had nothing left to fight for. She cried until she was empty, the only sound her own ragged, hitched breathing. A shadow fell over her. She looked up, her eyes blurred. Elias. He had followed her. He had left the crowd, the victory, and had come for her. He did not say a word. He did not offer congratulations. He did not tell her she was strong. He simply knelt in the alley mud, his knees cracking, and put his arms around her. She fell against him, her hands grabbing the front of his worn coat. She buried her face in his chest. He was solid. He was real. He smelled of pine and horse and gunpowder and truth. He held her, his arms locked around her, absorbing her shudders, giving her his own strength. "It's over, Clara," he whispered, his voice a low rumble in her ear. I won," she whispered back, her voice broken, muffled against his shirt. "The ranch, it's mine again." She pulled back, just enough to look at him, her face a ruin of tears and dirt, her eyes pleading with him to understand. I can't go back. Elias, I saw it. I saw their faces. I saw the house in my mind. Her voice dropped to a choked whisper. It's not home anymore. He looked at her, his pale eyes full of a tenderness she had only seen in the mountains. He knew, better than anyone, what it meant to come back to a place that was no longer a home. He reached up with his rough, scarred thumb and gently, carefully, wiped a streak of mud and tears from her cheek. Then let's build our own, he said. They did not leave Wyndham the next day, or the day after. The wheels of the law, even when freshly greased by scandal, turned slowly. Clara was forced to stay at the boarding house, a guest of the fawning Mrs. Gable, who now remembered her as that poor, dear, brave child. Elias stayed in the livery, sleeping in the hayloft, his presence a dark, watchful shadow on the edge of the town's restored conscience. He would not come inside. Clara had to sign papers. Judge Harrelson, his face a mask of nervous, apologetic sweat, oversaw every one. The foreclosure was nullified. The forged documents were entered as evidence in the case against Meeker. The ranch, Holloway's End, was legally hers again. The town council, led by Mr. Henderson, came to her, hats in hand. They offered apologies. They offered credit. They offered to help her rebuild. Clara met them on the boarding house porch, Elias standing 10 feet behind her, his arms crossed, his face like stone. She listened to their offers, their pledges of support, their relief that the town's good name had been cleared. The ranch, Mr. Henderson said. It's yours. Clara, free and clear. A terrible business. But you're home. Thank you, Mr. Henderson, she said, her voice clear and polite, but as cold as the mountain water. But I am not home. She had made her decision in the alley, her face buried in Elias's coat. The word home had become a stone, a weight she could no longer carry. I am selling the ranch, she announced. The councilman gaped. Selling? But to who? The railroad. After this scandal, they've pulled their offer. Not to the railroad, Clara said. To the town, to all of you, for $1. She laid a new deed on the table. My father, Samuel Holloway, loved this land. He did not love it for its price. He loved it for its grass, its water, its sky. He meant for it to be a home. It cannot be my home any longer, but it should not be a poison. She looked at them, her gaze unflinching. I am deeding the Holloway's End Ranch to the township of Wyndham. The water rights are to be held in common. The land is to be set aside for new families, for grazing, for anyone who needs a start, and who does not have a banker breathing down their neck. It is not to be sold. Not ever. It was a judgment and a gift and a complete, final absolution. She was cutting the last thread. She was setting herself free. Clara, you can't, Henderson whispered. It's worth a fortune. It cost my father his life, and me, everything else, she said. $1 is more than fair. She took the silver dollar from the stunned judge and put it in her pocket. My father's equipment, the stock, the house, sell it all. Use the money to build a proper school. My father would have liked that. She turned, her business in Wyndham, her life as Clara Holloway. Over, she walked down the steps, and Elias, without a word, fell into step beside her. 3 days later, they left. They did not ride out west, toward the unknown. First, they rode back up, into the Bighorns. They rode to Elias's cabin. It was a different homecoming. She was not a patient. He was not a savior. They were partners. They spent 2 days packing. He took his traps, his tools, his axe, his blankets. He took the pot she had cooked their meals in. He took his rifle, his revolver, his ammunition. He left the worn copy of Shakespeare on the shelf. Clara packed her own small things, the moccasins his wife had worn, the dress she had not, and the two small carved wooden birds. When he was ready, Elias opened the door to his lean-to, and to the small, warm chicken coop. He left them open. "Wilderness will claim it," he said, "as it should." He stood for a long moment, looking at the cabin that had been his sanctuary, his prison, his escape. He had come here to die, in a way, and now he was leaving, to live. He turned his back on it and did not look back. They rode west, toward Montana territory. They left the bighorns behind them, a jagged purple memory against the rising sun. They rode into a new, vast, empty land, a land that had no name for them. The journey was not easy. Spring on the high plains was a treacherous season. It was a liar. One day, the sun would beat down, warm and promising. The next, a cold, wet snow would fall, a cruel reminder of winter's grip. They faced cold nights, huddled together under a shared canvas tarp, their blankets pooled, their bodies a single, necessary warmth. They woke with frost on their hair, their breath pluming, their limbs stiff, but they would rise, build a small fire, make coffee, and move on. The rivers were the true enemy. The spring melt had turned every creek into a roaring, brown, angry torrent. They came to a river, wide and fast, the water churning with ice and debris. It was not the gentle stream Clara had known. It was a beast. "We can't cross here," she said, her voice tight with fear, the memory of her fall, her brokenness, sharp in her mind. Elias studied the water, his face grim. "We can't go around. It's miles to any other crossing, and it'll be just as bad. We go through." He was a soldier. He was a tactician. He spent half a day preparing. He cut saplings, built a small, rough raft. He unpacked their supplies, the flour, the salt, the precious coffee, the tools, and lashed them to the raft, wrapped in their canvas. "You'll swim the horses," he told her. "Keep their heads up. They'll panic, but you can't. You drift. You let the water take you to the far bank. You fight it. It'll kill you. I'll take the raft." It was a nightmare. The water was colder than death. It stole her breath, the shock of it a physical blow. Her horse, the buckskin, fought the current, its eyes wide with terror. But Elias was on the pack horse beside her, his hand on her horse's bridle, his voice a low, steady curse against the roar of the water. "Keep going! Don't stop! Kick! Kick! Clara!" They made it. They collapsed on the far bank, shivering, soaked, but alive. Their supplies, their raft, had made it too. They spent the rest of the day drying, their hands shaking, their bodies exhausted. That night, she was rubbing down the horses, her arms aching, when a moment of pure black despair washed over her. She stopped, her face buried in the horse's damp mane. "What are we doing, Elias?" she whispered, her voice a small, broken thing. "We have nothing. We're just running. It's just as hard as the ranch. It's harder. Maybe I should have stayed." He came to her. He did not touch her. He just stood by her shoulder, watching the last of the light bleed from the sky. "Staying is hard," he said, his voice low. "Leaving is hard. You choose your hard. This is our choice. That was his." He was right. This cold, this hunger, this fear. It was theirs. They had chosen it. It was not a banker's choice. It was not a town's. It was free. She turned and put her arms around his waist, her face against his damp, smoky shirt. He held her, his hand stroking her wet, tangled hair. Their bond, which had been forged in the fire of confession and the ice of survival, was now tempered by the water. It was not just love. It was trust. They traveled for weeks. They left the plains and rose again, into a new set of mountains, a range that felt older, wilder than the bighorns. They saw no one, no tracks but deer and elk, and the high, thin print of a wolf. One evening, they made camp by a lake. It was a high-country lake. A perfect, still, blue-green eye, reflecting the snow-capped peaks that surrounded it. The silence was profound. Not the silence of Elias's cabin, which had been a human, lonely silence. This was the silence of God. They sat by their small fire, the air sharp, the stars so close they looked like pinpricks in a dark blanket. They had shot a rabbit that day, and the smell of the roasting meat was rich in the clean air. Elias was staring into the fire, his face a map of shadows, his heart, for the first time in a decade, quiet. He was not a ghost. He was a man, sitting by a fire, with a woman. "I never thought," he said, his voice a low rumble, swallowed by the vastness. Clara waited, watching his profile. "I never thought I'd be here," he said, struggling for the words. "With anyone. When I came back, when I saw my empty house, and my brother was gone. I was a killer. That's all I was. I'd killed for my country, for nothing. I was a hollow thing, a ghost." He looked at her, his pale eyes full of a pain so old it was part of his bones. "Ghosts. Ghosts don't get to feel. They don't get to love. I didn't think. I never thought I'd be worthy of warmth again. Of this." His confession, his shame, his deep soldier's wound, hung in the still, starlit air. He was a man who had condemned himself to a life sentence of solitude, and she had, without trying, pardoned him. Clara looked at his scarred hand, resting on his knee. She reached out and covered it with her own. Her hand was as scarred as his now, calloused from the rains, from the axe, from the river, from... "You're not a ghost, Elias," she said, her voice soft, but as clear as the lake water. "And it was never about being worthy. I wasn't looking for a worthy man. I was just as broken, just as cold." She squeezed his hand. "You didn't have to be worthy. You just had to stay." He turned his hand, his fingers lacing with hers. He looked at her, his heart in his eyes, and he knew, with a certainty that settled his soul, that he would stay forever. They found their land a week later. They crested a high ridge after a hard day's climb, and it was there. It was a meadow, like his old one, but better. It was high, maybe 7,000 feet, a wide, sloping bowl of green, knee-deep in wild timothy and flowers. A creek, clear and fast, cut through the middle of it. It was protected on the north and west by a thick, dark stand of lodgepole pine and aspen, and to the south it opened up to a view that stole the breath, a vast, green valley, and beyond it 100 miles of mountains, range after range, fading into a blue, hazy distance. It was a fortress, it was a garden, it was a cathedral. They dismounted, their horses grazing immediately on the rich grass. Elias walked to the center of the meadow. Near the creek, he knelt. He grabbed a handful of the black, rich earth. He crumbled it in his hand. He smelled it. He looked at the trees, judging the timber. He looked at the water. Clara just stood. She felt the sun on her face. She felt the clean, light wind, which smelled of pine and wildflowers. She felt a stillness, a rightness. Elias came back to her. He didn't speak. He just held out his hand, his palm full of the dark, rich soil. Clara smiled. It was the first true, unburdened smile she had given in years. "Yes," she whispered. "This one, this land." They began to build. Their first home was the canvas tarp, stretched between two pines. But it was a home. The work was brutal. It was the hardest work either of them had ever done. But it was not a labor of debt, or survival, or fear. It was a labor of creation. They felled the trees. Elias taught her how to use the two-man saw. their bodies finding a rhythm, push-pull, push-pull, the clean scent of sawdust rising. He taught her how to swing the axe, how to read the grain of the wood, how to make the tree fall exactly where he wanted. She grew stronger, her arms and back hard, her body a lean, efficient tool. They peeled the logs. They dug the foundation. They notched the logs with a precision that left no room for the wind. Elias was a master builder. His hands, which had known such violence, now gentle and sure as he fitted the wood. Clara was the chinker. She mixed the mud, the clay, the dry grass. Her hands plunged deep into the earth. She packed the spaces between the logs, her fingers making their home tight, warm, and secure. They worked from the first light of dawn until their muscles screamed and the light failed. And at night, they would fall onto their bedroll, too tired to speak, too tired to do anything but sleep, their bodies curled together. But on the seventh day, they rested. They would wash in the creek, the cold water a baptism. They would hunt. They would walk their land. Clara found a patch of wild, yellow columbine and purple lupine. She carefully dug them up, her hands gentle in the earth, and replanted them in front of the half-built cabin, near the stone she had chosen for a doorstep. Elias watched her, a small, soft smile on his face. She looked up, her face smudged with dirt, her hair escaping her braid. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "It needs something," she said, looking at the bright, fragile flowers, a spot of delicate color against the raw, new wood. "It needs a little softness." She patted the earth around the last flower, her gaze moving out over the vast, green, true valley. "This land?" she said, her voice quiet. "It never lied to me." Months passed. The cabin was finished before the first snow. It was a small, solid, beautiful thing. One room, a strong plank floor, a stone fireplace that Elias had built with a perfect, clean draw. It was tight, it was warm, it was theirs. The summer faded. The aspen on the ridge turned a brilliant, shaking gold. The high country autumn came, sharp and clear and cold. Elias's traps were full. They had jerked venison hanging from the rafters. Clara's small garden, which she had stubbornly planted, had yielded a surprising crop of potatoes, onions, and hardy greens. They were ready for winter. They were ready. They lived simply their nights, which had been full of exhausted sleep. Now were not. The physical labor lessened, and the other, quieter parts of their lives rushed in. Their nights were warm, filled with the glow of the fire. They were filled with quiet touches. A hand on the small of her back as she cooked, her fingers, tracing the scar on his temple as he read to her from a book of poems he had traded from a passing trapper. They were filled with shared dreams. They talked of the horses they would raise, of the second room they would build, for a child. Maybe, if the world was kind. They were filled with whispered promises, which were not promises at all, but simple, true statements. "I am here. You are safe. This is home." One night, the first deep snow of the winter had fallen. The world outside was silent, buried in a foot of clean, white down. The sky was so clear the stars were a brilliant diamond fire. Elias was restless. He kept pacing the small cabin, from the door to the window, his energy a strange, thrumming thing in the quiet room. "Elias," Clara said, smiling from her seat by the fire, where she was mending his coat. "What is it? You're wearing a path in the floor." He stopped. He looked at her. Her face was fuller now. The harsh angles softened. Her eyes were clear and bright and happy. He was terrified. He was terrified of how much he loved her, how much he had to lose. "Come outside," he said, his voice rough. "Outside, Elias, it's 10 degrees. Just for a minute. Put your coat on. And your boots." She looked at him. Her curiosity piqued. She bundled up, and he took her hand, his own rough, warm hand, and led her out into the night. The cold was sharp, but the air was still. The meadow was a sea of blue-white, glittering under the starlight. It was so bright, it was almost like day. The silence was absolute. She started to say, but he put a finger to her lips. "Listen," he whispered. She listened. There was nothing, just the vast, cold, beautiful, perfect silence of their world. He let go of her hand. He fumbled in his own pocket, his scarred, rough fingers clumsy. I am not a good man. Clara," he whispered, his voice shaky, his breath pluming in the starlight. "I am what I am. I'm scarred. I'm broken. I'm a quiet, angry man. I'm not a poet. I'm not a banker. I have nothing but this land, this life." "You are not nothing, Elias," she whispered, her heart full. He fumbled. I made you this." He pulled his hand from his pocket and held it out. It was not a ring. It was not gold. It was another carved piece of wood. It was a perfect, small, wooden token, just like the first one he had given her. But this one, it was two birds, side by side, their wings just touching, carved from a single piece of pine. Clara's breath caught. Tears, hot and sudden, filled her eyes, freezing on her lashes. "This is all I have," he whispered, his voice thick. "This, my hand, my heart, which I thought was dead. I love you, Clara Holloway. I love you. Will you? He didn't know how to ask. He didn't know the words. Clara took her mitten off, her hand bare in the cold. She took his hand, the one that held the token, and closed her fingers over his. "Elias Crow," she said, her voice shaking with a love so big it filled the valley. "I am not looking for a poet, and God knows I am not looking for a banker." She smiled, the tears tracking, warm, down her cold cheeks. "No banker, no preacher, just you and me." He pulled her to him, his arms crushing her, and he kissed her, a cold, starry, desperate, and perfect kiss. The story ends, but it does not. It ends every night, and it begins every morning. It ends with them, standing on the edge of their land, scarred but unbroken, their hands, one large and one small, both calloused, both strong, linked together. They stand, their home at their backs, and watch the sun rise, a slow, hot, golden promise, over the new, true world they claim together. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would be so honored if you would take a moment to comment below and let us know where in the world you are listening from. Be sure to subscribe to From Wild West for more stories like this. And please, share your thoughts in English. We would love to hear them.